Early on in human history, one discovery allowed us to develop into the species that could do more than walk upright, make and utilize tools, and merely survive with greater efficiency. While the discovery and control of fire had huge practical benefits, it also gave our ancestors a platform to convene, to spread wisdom, share knowledge, and to connect at a cognitive level we never had before. Fire turned us into a species of storytellers. Fire allowed our ancestors to extend their day by hours, not for work, but for socializing in an intentional way. This extension of the day was reserved almost exclusively for stories that allowed a community of people to access information and process the world around them in a new way. These stories connected lives across space and time and conveyed lessons through the unique lens of the storyteller. To better understand the impact that fire had on human culture, anthropologist Polly Weissner spent months observing a tribal society in northeast Namibia who lived similarly to our foraging ancestors. She recorded 174 conversations with special attention to the distinction between their daytime and nighttime social interactions. Her observations show us that these regular nighttime gatherings, and more specifically the importance placed on building relationships through storytelling, is a cornerstone of human culture. And while it might not as often be a literal fire that brings us together, we can see manifestations of this practice in everyday life in modern society. In my family, and I would imagine for many of you here as well, the kitchen table is the center of our world. That is our fire. That is where we process the world around us. And for me, it's where I find balance and harmony when the axis of my delicate world shifts, sometimes seismically, but most often in small, unnoticeable ways. For over 60 years, our kitchen table has brought us moments of reflection, clarity, and belonging. It has seen the advent of life many times over and experienced the kind of emptiness that only death can create. It has enjoyed life's simple victories like a baby's first birthday or a visit from old friends. The history that has been absorbed into those wooden grains is the fuel that keeps that fire burning. Now, the family I refer to here is not a family I was born into. When my mother got remarried 14 years ago, I joined a very large, loud, and loving family. But I was quiet and reflective and preferred to observe than to draw any sort of attention to myself. So the thought of having to find a way to earn a spot and a voice in this group paralyzed me. I had no idea where to start. But what they did to welcome me, in hindsight, was the most generous and significant gesture they could have ever come up with. They gave me my own spot at the table. And while it might seem like an obvious thing to do, I knew this act came from a place of love. At a place where so much of their family history had already been written, they were giving me the opportunity to add my role to this story. To this day, it remains one of the most precious gifts they probably never even realized they gave me. They gave me that place to start. When I reflect on why hospitality is so important to me as an individual, I think about our kitchen table. I trace it back to that moment when that wonderful woman who I quickly grew comfortable with and proud calling my grandmother told me with a wink, "That's your spot." When the arrivals of my first, second, and third sister didn't change my seat at the table because she wouldn't allow it. She never said so directly, but she knew how important that feeling of belonging was to me. That to this family, my blood and theirs was the same now, and that my role in this story was valued. I also think about how in the 14 years they've been a part of this family, they've never turned away a visitor, not even once that I've seen. One Christmas Eve, 10 of us had the flu, and it would have been far kinder to turn away visitors than to let them into that house. But even then, they made time for them at the table. Weissner notes that stories told around firelight convey information about the nature of individuals in the present and recent past, their experiences and feelings, as well as factual knowledge about things like kinship and long-distance networks. These stories created an emotional connection between the listeners and the subjects of these stories. This is just as true for the stories my family loves to recite. Our kitchen table is the setting for some of my favorite stories, tales of romance and adventure, even cautionary tales spoken in low voices as if they were a secret. Our table has had the privilege of meeting characters that I've only known through photographs, but a part of them is always present, as if our table's been able to capture a little piece of their spirit. We point to where they used to sit or where they were sitting when these stories were playing out in real time. And we talk about them the way we would talk about any other historical figure, their life, their legacy, and for some, their infamy. They have a tendency to crop up in different genres, sometimes as supporting characters, sometimes as the hero, and every so often, even as the bad guy. And although I've never met so many of them, they've all taught me valuable lessons. They'll most likely never live on the printed pages of a storybook, but they will live forever at our table. Weissner identified that another culturally significant benefit to nighttime spent around the fire is the ability to bring people from different groups together as one cohesive community. This same ability, perhaps more than anything else, is what makes our kitchen table so integral to our lives. Every story and perspective different than our own shared across our table imbues it with a spirit of kinship and acceptance. Our table is a meeting place for family and friends and those just passing through. It's where the tribunal of women, mothers, aunts, and sisters all meet to decide the fate of the many brave boys who've attempted to win the hearts of one of 15 girls in the family. And for those who pass that test, they've earned a seat at our table forever. And they're expected to be at that table for every holiday forever, no exceptions. Our table's multilingual. It can understand everything from baby babble to those unspoken nuanced emotions. It's where my sisters learn to string together sentences sprinkled with inappropriate words because certain family members lack a filter. It's where I learn to apologize and where I learn to really hear what's being said through silence. And if our kitchen table could talk, it would be wiser than us all. We've entrusted it with our darkest secrets and deepest desires, often whispered over afternoon coffee or too many glasses of wine, and so for that reason, we are all pretty relieved that it can't. Etched into the surface are the indentations of overlapping letters from years of homework, crossword puzzles, and handwritten letters. There are stories permanently scribed onto our table's surface. You just have to know how to read them. Our table's experienced a lot of love, a little hate, and everything in between. It is a brace for the hardest laughter and a catcher of tears. It's that physical divide and disagreements, and a place to rest your head when words just won't suffice. Death, like birth, forever changes the makeup of our wooden table. The only thing worse than the emotional holes that death can create inside of us are the physical spaces it leaves behind. That empty seat is a constant declaration of a person's absence, and for a long time, that seat remains empty, as if filling it meant forgetting them. But in time, new patriarchs and matriarchs quietly accept their new responsibilities, and when they're ready, they fill that empty seat, ensuring that fire never goes out. Our table has seen many people leave, some temporarily and some for good. But for those that do return, it welcomes them back with always room for one more. A table like ours would be advertised to comfortably seat 6, but my family would say that's utter nonsense. Why seat 6 when you could seat 15? This, of course, doesn't happen without mathematical equations, a few rounds of musical chairs, and what seems to be a lot of magic. But the true magic in our table is not in how many people were able to squeeze around it, though Christmas defies all laws of physics, or even in how it's able to retain a little piece of each person who pulls up a seat. It's in what you take away from it, what our ancestors took away from their nights spent around the fire. At the end of the day, our table is just a table. It's an object. It's a stage, a platform, a vehicle for critical lessons in tradition, hospitality, love, and hardship. These are the things that you take with you when you excuse yourself. This is where life makes the most sense to me. It's where I grew up. It's a collection of memories and the point of convergence of every life that has ever entered mine. It's where I learned about loss and where I experienced new types of love. Our kitchen table is a place of reflection. I remember the people who used to sit around it who are no longer there. I remember the conversations at that table that changed my life's trajectory. Most importantly, I remember myself, who I was, who I still am, and who I always wanted to be. I can measure my current self against the standard I set when I was younger. Our kitchen table is a place of clarity. And no matter how much time I spend away, my family's always sitting there waiting for me to walk through the door. Some faces are missing, and all faces look a little bit older, but they're in their seats waiting for me to fill mine. Our kitchen table is a place of belonging. You can find this balance, this harmony, in the most unobvious places. For me, I find it sitting at our kitchen table, in the memories it evokes, in that primal practice of sitting together and discovering the world through stories and through shared experiences. When life is chaotic, messy, or out of sorts, or even when it's going as perfectly as planned, create the opportunity to connect with others and to connect with yourselves. Go build a fire. Thank you.